Hanafi background, right? They were generally associated with the Kalam schools, but you will see there's a different relationship with Kalam depending on the deobandi scholars. But they came from Kalami school, the Ash'ari Maturidi school, and they were connected to the Sufi Turuq, right? Loosely said, right? That's what the Darul Deoband, the teachers, etc. were. And so naturally, those who were going to study there, they will also learn this type of Islam.
We can't actually talk about Mishkāt al-Masābīh because it doesn't make sense to talk about the way you can't talk about Zujajah al-Masābīh without talking about Mishkāt. You can't talk about Mishkāt without talking about Masābih al-Sunnah by Imam al-Baghawi, rahimahullah ta'ala.
You can easily, so he mentioned subtleties, he mentioned dhabt and gharib al-fad. And as a student, when you're studying, as a teacher, when you're teaching books of hadith and you have a great amount of content to do, then what you want to do is you want to have something like this which you can digest, understand the hadith, and then if something you're stuck on, and then you can go to the larger commentaries. The reason being is that when you're looking at sciences like fiqh, you're looking at science like usul, there the maqsood is the science, right? It's not the kitab itself. So when you're learning hidayah, right? Hidayah is a tool for you to learn the fiqh.
Yes.
Right? Hidayah itself, right? If you change it, of course, it's a great book, great, right? But if you can shift that to another book that does the job, it does the job.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلوات والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back to our book review show with myself and our esteemed teacher Maulana Zeeshans, and we're back. It's been a bit of a while. I mean, it's, you know, there was Eid and then a week and then this week as well. So just a quick recap. How was your Eid, Maulana?
Alhamdulillah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salli wa nusallim ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, it was good. It was good. We were trying to get time to record this episode for a while, but it's just been a bit difficult weekends. Summer's kicked in as well, so
It's the end of the year, innit?
So the madrasa got exams coming up, so I think everyone's a bit busy. But inshallah, the goal is once we get the holidays, we can hopefully do much more.
Inshallah.
A few stuff planned,
Inshallah. Now, some of the previous episodes that we've done, we've had, you know, some comments and feedback, and obviously we've done it on topics which, or on things which people may find, you know, they might not take a liking to it, etc. And there's quite a few comments, etc., that say that, you know, these they claim that, like, these deobandis, you know, they talk about X, Y, and Z, or they're saying X, Y, and Z, and when it comes to, you know, their own scholars, then they don't say anything, or these kind of comments have come about, right? So I just want to ask you outright, this we have to clarify these things, because this is, you know, it's important. Are you deobandi?
What gives it away? What gives it away?
It's the glasses.
Okay, fair enough. It's actually a very, because we actually spoke about it beforehand. I thought it was interesting. It was good that we tackle this question briefly, because we're going to go into the book reviews. But because anyone that talks about any topic, naturally people want to know the background of the person, and that's fair. We do all the time when we're doing reviews. We're looking at, saying, trying to find information about them so we can get a better understanding of where these people are coming from. So the question of are we, or am I, or as an institution, are we deobandi? First things first, when we talk about deoband, or especially stuff like deobandism, then we don't have an official group with membership. There's no secret meetings. Not that I'm not been invited to any, but I'm pretty sure there's no secret meetings or membership.
Maybe right? You just don't know about them.
But there's no head, someone that you follow. But I want to respond to this in a way that I don't go down the route of sloganeering where I just say that Deoband is Ahl Sunnah, and nor do I move away from saying, Deoband is just a town. Just like, just one town amongst other towns. To kind of give the answer with some meaning. That's what's important, right? So before we want to answer the question of are we Deobandi, we have to kind of work out what exactly is Deoband, and what does Deoband represent, and what is our connection to Deoband. Because now, before we go to that, so let's answer these questions. So Deoband, as we know, is a town in northern India, and where there's a madrasa built. And so it doesn't start off as a movement in the sense of here's a leader trying to establish certain, like a political movement, a party. Anything, nothing like that, right? There could be people amongst them that have those goals and intentions, but I'm saying is the idea of itself is a madrasa. So you establish a madrasa and you have like-minded people. And the like-minded people tend to be people that they came from the Hanafi background, right? They were generally associated with the Kalam schools, but you will see there's a different relationship with Kalam depending on the deobandi scholars. But they came from Kalami school, the Ash'ari Maturidi school, and they were connected to the Sufi Turuq, right? Loosely said, right? That's what the Darul Deoband, the teachers, etc. were. And so naturally, those who were going to study there, they will also learn this type of Islam. But it was an educational reform movement, trying to educate Muslims and masses to bring them back to Islam. But as you'd expect with any madrasa, there will be some characteristics that kind of stand out. So if you're talking about, are we Deobandi in terms of, so what does this Darul Deoband do then? So Darul Deoband, it has this method of within 6 months, you have in Saharanpur, not too far from there, you have another madrasa, Mazar-ul-Ulum, which is a sister institution. And within the span of a few years, you see the madrasa kind of brings up multiple other institutions. And thereafter, you have this notion of graduates that go on and establish another madrasa. And again, when these madrasa are being established, there isn't necessarily a formal recognition to say you're Deobandi. So for example, when we want to set up a madrasa, for example, as being graduates of one of these institutions, because our madrasas will eventually connect back to Darul Deoband, right? So we have Imam Zakaria Academy. Imam Zakaria Academy founder is a graduate of Darul Berry. Darul Berry is connected to Mawlana Yusuf Murtada Rahimahullah, connects back to Shaykh Zakaria, and then you can go back to Mazar-ul-Ulum, back to Darul Deoband. So every madrasa you have eventually, that's, so if you're saying Deobandi like that, then yes, there is a connection going back to the Darul Deoband.
A senate of madrasas.
If you like, yeah. So you go back to it. And that's the first point. So in that sense, yes, this is how our institution goes back to. But the other thing that makes the answer a bit more complicated is that there isn't a single individual, right? So it's not
centralized.
Yeah, in the sense, not just centralized, you don't have a leader.
Yeah.
So one is like you have a madrasa that heads it. You don't have an individual that runs the show. So there is no single person that says, well, this is Deoband for us. So like currently, if you talk about Deobandism, you probably say Mufti Taqi Usmani is the most highest representative of what Deoband is. But if you were to go to Pakistan and look at Pakistani polemics, there'll be other Deobandi scholars saying, well, we disagree with you on X, Y, and Z, and a whole host of things. So, and they are also Deobandis. They also have connections that go back to Darul Deoband. So because the reason for this is that it started off as a madrasa. And when you start something as a madrasa, you're going to have different people that have variations in ideas and thoughts and methods, whether that will be political, whether that will be theological. But when we're talking about these kind of differences, it doesn't necessarily have to be significant, but there's natural type of differences. Some are differences in, let's say, perspectives. When we say theology, that sounds very significant. What we mean by that is like, if you look at Mawlana Rashid Ahmed Gangohi and Mawlana Qasim Nanotbi, and you compare their method of approach to kalam and the aqliyat, the rational sciences, it's very different, right? And any person can read this. It's not too hard to find this. Read any Mawlana Qasim Nanotbi's books, read the Fatawa of Mawlana Gangohi on aqaid issues. You can see the difference between them in terms of method. So there's a whole lot of letters that have been preserved and talking about their perspective, the views on this. So you have differences like that because it's a madrasa. But at the same time, it's not all over the place completely because you have a similar upbringing in terms of similar teachers.
Stay within the tradition.
Similar tradition, yes. So it would be a Hanafi tradition. It's connected to the Ash'ari Maturidi school. And then you have a connection with Sufi Turuq, as I mentioned, right? And then, like, for example, certain views, so this is on furu'at, these are not necessarily usul, but on certain positions, they become quite popular having certain positions. So when it comes to Mawlid, the Deobandis are recognized as generally being not people who perform Mawlid, although the way they disagree with it could slightly vary, but generally speaking, the Deobandi scholars would not practice the Mawlid. So that's a fara', that's not a usul. Because when you look at the usul of bid'ah, that would be a different question, right? So when we're talking about are we Deobandi, so I would say this is a tradition that we've studied under, and we have a connection there. But that connection is not a connection of like a centralized rule where there's, like I said, membership or individual, etc. So therefore, there's no such thing as a gotcha moment. So if someone said to me that, like last episode we spoke about Mawlana Ashraf Ali Thanwi and shirk and ibadah. So if you turn around to me and say, oh, but we found this book from this Deobandi scholar who's the Khalifa of so-and-so, and he said to the contrary, okay, like what do you want me to do? there's no such thing I can go back and they say go and sort this amount out amongst the deobandis. Well, I'll say there is no deobandi conference. So what do you want me to do? Like, who do I go to and things? So it's a very decentralized notion, but there's this association from madaris and a loose connection that we have on certain views and perspectives. But because, as I said, it's a madrasa, you would see sometimes even similar positions. This is something I discussed in my PhD. You sometimes have similar positions, but the approach of how they get to those similar positions are different, right? And sometimes they have different positions completely. So, for example, just to kind of highlight this, is that if you look at the deobandi madrasa and you look at where does the inspiration come from? So, one of the key inspirations of the madrasa deoband, as the senior deobandi scholars or those who in Darul Deoband would claim, is from Shah Waliullah. But then Shah Waliullah's approach to Hanafi fiqh and the issue of taqleed is very different to how the mainstream associates of Darul Deoband or those from Madrasa Deoband would be associated with. So that straight away you can confuse the line. So if I come across today and I say, well, if Darul Deoband is representative of Shah Waliullah, then I'm going to take on Shah Waliullah's approach, and that's the Deobandi approach. And there's precedent for this as well, for people doing this. So it does complicate the picture. So when I say, are we Deobandi? We say, well, yes, that's where our madaris and that's where our nisbah goes to. And it's not like Azhari per se, because Azhar is far more open.
It's in one place as well.
There's more of a personality to Deoband. There's more of a history to associate with certain views. So it's not easy to define because, like I said, we're not going back to a single individual. For example, for those who say, I know people don't say, but let's say someone says they're Barelvi. And when they're saying Barelvi, they're saying we are attributing ourselves to Maulana Ahmad Raza Khan. It becomes easy now to define to some degree. It's because I would say, well, you said this, Maulana Ahmad Raza Khan said this. How do you explain your nisbah? Just like we said, we're Hanafis, it's back to Imam Abu Hanifa. If you can prove something about Imam Abu Hanifa, then it is and I'm saying Hanafi is some of a gotcha moment, saying, oh, you got you because he's saying to the contrary. But when you're saying, like I said, as Deoband, it's a madrasa. Now, the reason why things get further complicated, like I said, we can discuss this in my PhD with examples whenever in the future, right? But just to complicate the discussion more, is that the subcontinent is predominantly in Urdu. So a lot of the writings of these scholars is in Urdu. So when, for example, you yourself is from IZA, you used to study Imam Zakariya Academy. You're going to graduate, inshallah. You graduate this year. You don't know Urdu, right?
No.
You can't read Urdu.
No.
So your connections, because of this, the global village we live in, you probably have very minimal connection with the senior Deobandi scholars.
Munqati'.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a gap between you and the Deobandi scholars, right? The senior scholars. So unless when you're reading Hadith, you may be reading Faydul Bari, maybe, or Badul Majhood. But in terms of like their Sawani Hayat, like their life stories and the Malfuzat, some in Arabic, but generally speaking, your association is not going to be with those senior scholars. So what happens now is that in the West, not just West overall, because people have access to so much different scholars, you can be maybe studying in Darul Deoband by reading the writings of a Salafi Shaykh in Medina, right? We could be here in the UK and connection going back to these scholars, but we may be reading the books also. Like, for example, if you're into Lugha, right, you may not be inspired by a Deobandi scholar, but you may be inspired by an Arab scholar that you like, or some scholar from somewhere else. So that would be your nisbah to that, which had been different 30 years ago, because you'd be much more entrenched in the system. But because there's a language separation, a cultural separation now, these terms, when we say Deobandi,
seems very distant.
It becomes very distant for people. So these kind of things need to be untangled. So I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, Deoband is meaningless, it's just a town, right? And nor am I going to say that Deoband is X, Y, and Z. I think that the correct answer to this is somewhere in between. But you have to realize that the vagueness is because of the fact that it is a madrasa, it has teachers, and when you have different scholars, part of a madrasa, you're not going to get the same views.
They're not going to be monolithic.
Yeah, and it's not going to, you go to one madrasa itself, you're here studying here, are you telling me each teacher is exactly the same?
Of course not.
No.
Even in the same class, like our class, we have, like my own example, myself, I'm more into the naqliyat. For me, hadith is, I'm interested in my hadith studies, whatever. But then other students in the class are more into aqliyat. They like their rational sciences, they like the kalam, etc. And that's in the same class. And that's in every class. And
then this can actually go into material differences as well.
Yeah.
Right? So you may have differences of opinion. So I'm not, again, when we're talking differences, we don't have to talk about we're talking about the foundations of Islam. We're saying differences in Masail and then differences in who you're inspired by. And this is a natural result of madrasas. But if it's a personality that we're following, that's different then. Because
it becomes difficult to then change that.
Yeah, because you have to then openly say that I disagree with the personality. So this is why I think it's a discussion that needs to be had in more depth. And it's something that this is what I mentioned, my PhD is on this topic in far more detail. But we can maybe discuss that in the future. But it's just to highlight that, yes, this is our tradition that where we study from. These are the scholars that but like I said, a lot of the scholars that I read, because of the access we have to information and books, maybe a whole host of scholars on different backgrounds. So we're not restricted to maybe the madrasa as maybe people would have been 40, 50 years ago, because you're in the madrasa, these are your mashayikh, these are your kitabs you're going to read, and you're much more, and it's a language as well. So we're not going to read as much as Urdu, right? So because even though I can read Urdu, it's not going to be the books that I go to so much. So then again, there's that little distance. And I remember when I finished madrasa, I graduated, I hardly read Urdu at that time. So I couldn't tell you like a basic chronology of who the senior deobandi scholars were. So despite us saying that we are connected to Darul Deoband or Deobandi in some degree, right? I could not give you a basic chronology of who came first, who came, when Imran Thamri passed away, when did this, what books did they write? I couldn't tell you any of that. And that was because it's not part of the madrasa itself. So that's when people say that, oh, you Deobandi said this, or your Akabir said this, they should realize that most students haven't got a clue who you're talking about.
Me included.
Yeah. So if I said to you, I go like, oh, did you know Maulana Manazi Ahsan Gilani, who predominantly wrote in Urdu, said, you won't know who I'm talking about, right? And then even like Moran Gangohi, you hear names, but you've probably never read his fatwa, because most of the stuff is...
A lot of times that teachers will say names as references that this sheikh did this sheikh did this.
And these are, I'm just mentioning the famous names. There's hundreds of people that are like the khulafa, and those who come after, or mudarris in this place, and teacher in Jami Farooqi, etc. And you don't have any connection because we don't go there, a lot of us. So because it was my effort as part of my dissertation, I learned much more about these names, but the average student has no idea. So when people say, oh, but your Deobandi scholar said this, it's like, well, would you explain? It's madrasa is thousands of us, and no one's dictating. So when you graduate, there's no one on your head saying, do you agree with all these set views that we've said, or how do you explain this ibarat in this book? How do you explain that ibarat in this book? And I'll be like, well, I've never read that book. It's not even part of my syllabus. We don't study that. I've never heard of it, right? So people come and say, how do you explain this ibarat? For most people, you go to me and say, what ibarat? What are you talking about? What book is this? I never heard. Who's the author even? Right? You say, well, this person, I don't know who you're talking about. So it's not, in essence, anything like it's a connection. It's a meaningful connection. But it's not in the rigid sense of a movement with some sort of membership that people may see. So that's why when we talk about groups, when we say stuff like Wahhabi, Deobandi, Barelvi, Ahli Hadith, Salafi, whatever terms you're using, Ikhwani, there's a whole host of terms we use. Each one has its nuance in how we define that. And for some, it's more easy than others. So when we talk about, let's say like Hizb ut-Tahrir as example, Hizb ut-Tahrir has membership. Right? So when we talk about Hizb ut-Tahrir, it's far more easier for me to know what we're talking about. So if you're a Hizb member, I can quite easily say, well, this is what your core texts have said. How do you respond to that? They can't turn around and say, I don't believe in that part of Hizb, because it's a membership group. You see, so you have core values.
You're subscribing to those values.
Exactly. But when you're talking about this Ahli Hadith, even the term itself is quite vague. It follows of Hadith. So that straight away would mean that your nisbah would be more vague and more open. But when I say Wahhabi, if someone is saying they're Wahhabi, right? And they're saying they're restricted to Muhammad Wahhab, it's more restrictive because you've told us who your nisbah is to. So that's exactly what we're talking about. Anyway, that's quite long, but you get that.
Just not everyone's going to be a part of a monolithic structure.
It depends on the nature of the group, I'm saying.
Exactly.
This is the Deoband is a madrasa. So that's something that's very important to realize. And it doesn't mean that they don't have an identity. There's not views that they hold. I'm not saying that. But it's going to be a loose association. There's always going to be people that are going to be outside, and not just like one, two. There's been sometimes numerous people. And sometimes there have been significant differences of a whole host of issues. And we can go through them. We don't have an issue. I don't want to go open up those kind of ones right now because that's not the purpose of today's podcast. But it's just something to highlight. So when people say to me, are you Deobandi or are we Deobandi? And then to say, well, no one's actually done this, but maybe they have, maybe not on the comments. I don't know, but people have said like, how do you explain this? I'm not at liberty to explain because I don't have any membership to this group, or nor have I said that I associate with or I ascribe to everything that this has been said. Right? If it's there, if it's a mistake, okay, it's a mistake. What do you want to do about it?
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, it's just,
Moving swiftly on to the actual subject matter of the podcast. So today we had 2 books that we were going to be discussing and somewhat comparing as well and contrasting. One is the book Mishkāt al-Masābīh by al-Khatib al-Tabrizi, rahimahullah, which is a pretty common book you'll find in most syllabuses studied by people that study in the UK in Hanafi madaris. And this book is quite significant in that syllabus. And the second book that we'll be studying is Zujājah al-Masābīh by, let me just get the name here, Shaykh Abdullah al-Hayderabadi. That's the name, right? Yes. So that's the second book. And that's like, and you can correct me on this, we'll discuss it later, but it's like a Hanafi version of Mishkāt. A Hanafi response to Mishkāt, you can say.
Not response, version.
Version's a better way of saying it. Yeah, version.
Let me just highlight this point, right? So the purpose of doing Zujajah Masābih, that was our purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But then it doesn't make a lot of sense to study Zujajah, which you don't know what Mishkāt is.
Exactly.
And then secondly, because you freshly studied Mishkāt last year, it'll be an opportunity for you to shine.
Okay.
All right. So if any mistakes are said, we've not discussed this before. So it's just to speak nonsense in the next 10, 15 minutes. Right? Just like I'm not speaking for all deobandi, I don't speak for you either. So it's a specific refutation just directed to you.
So I'm open to cancellation. Is that what
yeah, and I'll probably be on the bandwagon cancelling as well. So ready for that.
Oh no.
No pressure, but go for it.
There's very big pressure. So if I make mistakes, then all mistakes are from me and from Shaitan. I'm going to say that in advance because I'm probably going to make 1 million and then we're going to have to cut them out because the cameraman's there. He's going to cut them out, inshallah. Okay, so as Maulana rightly pointed out, I'm being tasked with introducing the book Mishkāt al-Masābīh, and we can't actually talk about Mishkāt al-Masābīh because it doesn't make sense to talk about the way you can't talk about Zujājah al-Masābīh without talking about Mishkāt. You can't talk about Mishkāt without talking about Masābih al-Sunnah by Imam al-Baghawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. And his book Masābih al-Sunnah, or his book Masābih al-Sunnah, is Mishkāt is an addition. The author Khatib al-Tabrizi, he actually worked on Masābih al-Sunnah and added to it a number of narrations. I'll mention all that later.
Let's give a bit of a date. So Baghawi dies in the year.
Baghawi dies year 516.
516
after Hijri.
So we're talking about 6th century, right?
Yeah, 6th century.
Yeah,
and
6th century, yeah.
And I think Khatib al-Tabrizi, he dies 741-ish.
Yeah, 741.
7141 is the
741.
741, yeah. That's the date that people say that he died. Some scholars mention, but what Imam al-Baghawi rahimahullah, who's from Baghshur in Khurasan, Baghshur, he was a Shafi'i, and he had many other works in the field of Hadith and the field of Tafsir as well. As I mentioned, he died in 516, but in Masābih al-Sunnah specifically, because he had a particular way of doing things in the book. What he would do is he would drop the asanid, even the Sahabi. So he would just say, Qala Rasulullah, or Ar Rasulillahi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he would mention the hadith. And only a few times, some have mentioned that he mentioned the companion's actual name, if it was significant. And one of the main themes, or one of the main things that he had in his manhaj in the book, was that he split each kitab into 2 subchapters. One was to do with the Sihah, what was narrated in Sahihain, or one of them. And the second one was al-Hisan, what is narrated in the Sunan al-Arba'ah. And this is the part where Khatib al-Tabrizi actually had to come and change a bit because of the fact that he had this framework going on. And the reason why is because a lot of scholars actually criticized him for that. Because his whole premises was anything that is mentioned in the Sunan al-Arba'ah is likely to be Hasan, therefore I'm going to put it in the Fasl al-Hisan. And I remember who was it? Imam al-Iraqi, he mentions in his Alfiyah, he mentions a couple of couplets. He mentions Imam al-Baghawi, he says, وَالْبَغَوِي إِذْ قَسَّمَ الْمَصَابِحَ إِلَى الصِّحَاحِ وَالْحِسَانِ جَانِحًا أَنَّ الْحِسَانَ مَا رَوَاهُ فِي السُّنَنِ رُدَّ عَلَيْهِ إِذْ بِهَا غَيْرُ الْحَسَنِ. So even Imam al-Iraqi, he brings him in his Alfiyah to show that he did do this, and he brings this in Bab al-Hasan, but he says this just to show that this taqseem was incorrect. That he shouldn't have said that, because in the Sunan al-Arba', no names, but everyone knows Ibn Majah, Sunan Abi Dawood, At-Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i. There are hadith which are weak, and in some places very weak, etc. So that taqseem was incorrect. Right. So he was very
just respond to that.
Okay. We'll come to responses in a bit. Okay, my time to shine.
Oh,
yeah. So yeah, but I was saying that this is a main critique of the book.
So don't stop listening right now then.
Don't stop listening right now. Yeah, if I've made a mistake, then I told you it's from Shaitan. So what Al-Khatib al-Tabrizi mentioned, what he did in his book, just so we move on to his book now, just briefly. So he came later on. I said he died in 741. He wrote his Mishkāt al-Masābīh, and that was at the request of his Shaykh, Imam al-Tibi, which you have in front of you as well. He actually wrote a commentary on his students' work.
Yeah.
So very interesting dynamic going on there, and probably a lesson for maybe those who are teaching and students that, everyone wants the fame for themselves, but Imam Tibi was suggesting to his student, then wrote a commentary supporting his student. It was quite interesting. But what he done with the work, Al-Khatib al-Tabrizi, he took the book, Masābih al-Sunnah. He said, let's do away with those names. Sihah, Hisan, nope. We'll keep it Fasl Awwal, Fasl Thani. And then he added a third subchapter, Fasl Thalith. And he kept the same kind of tartib. So the Fasl Awwal was what is mentioned in the Sahihain or in one of them. The Fasl Thani was mentioned in Sunnah Arba'a, but not all the time. It wasn't exhaustive. And then Fasl Thalith was where it's just ahadith and athar, sometimes even maqtu' narrations that are related to the bab that wasn't mentioned by Imam al-Baghawi, and he would include them in that third. And sometimes he would even have, I remember when we were studying it, there was actually some ahadith from Sahihain in there in the third fasl as well. So there he just adds them in. And Imam Baghawi's narrations, it actually comes up to 4,434. And Khatib al-Tabrizi, rahimahullah, he adds on about 1,500 odd. His total narration comes up to 5,945. There was some criticisms on his book as well, so you can respond to them as well. Well, you don't need to, I'm going to respond to them. But Imam al-Qazwini, he actually critiqued Al-Khatib al-Tabrizi, because ulama love critiquing each other, as you're going to do to me in a bit. I can see in your face.
A couple of points,
yeah. So anyway, so he's going to, he came up to say that there are about 18 ahadith in the book that were fabricated. He just called them mawdu'. So he critiqued them for that, criticized him for that. And Ibn Hajar, I hope I have Ibn Hajar somewhere to respond on my behalf.
Yeah.
He authored a risala where he responded on behalf of Al-Khatib al-Tabrizi to show that these ahadith are not in fact mawdu'. They are ranging across the spectrum from sahih to da'if, but they're not mawdu'. So that's a brief background to the book and etc. What are your points?
Okay.
He's scaring me.
No, it's fine. No.
He's just looking at me.
No, I can't look anywhere else. No, it's decent. There's, of course, what you've mentioned is not, this is what is found in many books. But on the first point of, so Imam Baghawi, he writes Masābih al-Sunnah. It's important to note that the significance of these books, like Masābih al-Sunnah, is kind of lost on us now.
Okay.
For this is a separate point, not to what you said, but we'll actually come back to in a second. Let's mention a specific point. So the issue of Sihah and Hisan, that Imam al-Baghawi does in his Masābih al-Sunnah, so he divides the book up. Then yes, it was criticized by scholars because of the fact that the hadith in the Hisan section, many of them are sahih, some of them are hasan, and some of them are da'if. But the reality is that was Imam Baghawi, when he says the word hasan, was he referring to the istilah of hasan?
Oh,
you understand?
You kind of just assume that.
You assume it because it becomes common.
Yeah.
Right? But then if you didn't know the fact, and this is something which has been noted by certain scholars, and I'll be talking about this book by Shaykh Khatib as well, which is very good, right? So he makes a note of this as well, which, by the way, was on your reading list I told you to read, so you would have made that mistake if you read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I briefly looked into it.
Yes, it's right there, that's why.
Yeah.
And it's actually on the second page of the reading if you had started it.
I've been cancelled.
Yeah. So he mentions that because sometimes Imam Baghawi, he cites a hadith, right, in the Hisan, and he himself weakens it. Right, and he gives silence. He even weakens it, says munkar even. So clearly he doesn't mean hasan here in the istilahi sense. This was just his istilah.
Okay.
So his istilah was sihah, Bukhari, Muslim, Hisan. This not in the istilah of the books of ulum al-hadith, which is that hasan is what is between Sahih and Da'if. So it's just a category just below Khaf al-Dabt, whatever definition you want to give for it, right? So that's not what he had in mind. So that criticism, although it can cause confusion to students, and it has caused issues where it has become quite common. I remember sometimes when we used to have these madkhals to ulum al-hadith, some teachers would still say these things, would say like, what is Sunnah Arba'a is Hasan, and what is Bukhari Muslim is Sahih, or what is Abu Dawud Tirmidhi is Hasan.
Very generalized statements.
And these kind of perspectives kind of enforce that. So that's number one. Number two, about the point of Qazwini and finding the 18 hadith fabrication, that's to do with Masābih Sunnah.
Oh.
It's the Masābih, the 18 hadith and Masābih Sunnah.
Okay.
So even if you look at the name of the book, right, that I have over here.
Big blunders.
No, it's all right, sure.
That's what happens. That's what happens when you make me speak. That flop.
No, it's fine. Yeah, so the book is called Ajwibatul Hafidh ibn Hajar an Ahadith al-Masābīh.
Okay.
All right, so this is actually interesting that you mentioned this. That this Masābih, there's 18 hadith that you mentioned. So it's still correct. It's still in Mishkāt.
Yeah.
But the criticism was against Masābih or Sunnah.
Okay.
But then Mishkāt obviously brings those hadith as well. All right, so it's not that. But it's interesting is that the one who documents this, so he goes, who writes his questions of Ibn Hajar was actually Ibn Amir al-Hajj, the student of Ibn Humam, who's a student of Ibn Hajar as well, a Hanafi scholar, right? So he actually writes this, and this is actually published separately. You actually, if you get the Shaykh Albani edition of
Mishkāt, at the end of that,
at the end of that, you'll find this. That's about Masābih al-Sunnah.
Okay.
In terms of Khatib Tabrizi and his Mishkāt al-Masābīh, then in the Fasl al-Thalith, there are other hadith that have also been said to be extremely weak or fabricated. So the 18 is about Masābih al-Sunnah, and the other hadith that have been discussed, which Ibn Hajar we'll come back to that, but that's the Masābih al-Sunnah. So anyway, it does come. It's just that it's more criticism towards that. Okay, that's that. So that's so it's a good introduction there, inshallah, to pick it up. A few other points that it's good to mention around it is that when reviewing such a book, that what's the significance of this book? So if you look at Masābih al-Sunnah or Mishkāt or these type of books like Jami' al-Usul, and so on and so forth, right? The significance of these books was that...
Before we get onto that, right?
Yeah.
Why did these books even need to be written?
Oh yeah, this is what we're going to answer.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So then what's the purpose of these books? So why did they become popular? What was the purpose of them? Yeah. Well, the reality is that if you can kind of, if you go back in time to 800, 900 years, and I'm telling you that, okay, we want to look at a dalil of issues, or we want to look at evidences of things, right? That's a hefty task. The fact that you can't just go purchase books with ease, you can't search books with ease. So you're going to have to, spend a considerable amount of time going for maqra sessions. And remember, books like Bukhari, where you don't necessarily have all the hadith in one place. So your hadith that you're looking for could be in a completely different bab. So it's going to be a hefty task if you're locating hadith in Bukhari. And there's been many examples of people saying, oh, that's not in Bukhari, it's in Bukhari.
Yeah.
So you have to do these maqra sessions to kind of or read yourself excessively. So these books were very useful because what they did was it brought the relevant hadith across the hadith books into one place. So if you're looking at the section of Salah, right? So you don't have to go through 5-6 books. You've got one book that collects it for you.
So it's like an easy reference point. It's
a easy reference point. And also there's also like Dabt has been done. So they tell you about how to pronounce certain words, and there's Hawashi written as well. So it's very useful for the scholars in the past. So there's a number of attempts, and they were to different degrees successful because naturally there is a human effort, right? So when there's a human effort, there may be hadith missed out. So someone does an addendum and adds certain stuff, takes certain stuff away. So these books were very useful. But if you see now, because Mishkāt is popular because we have them as part of our syllabus. But if you were to study dirasat or studies or current research, you don't see these books being cited much, right? The books that are cited, I'll give you an example, right? So you have Majma' al-Zawaid of Nuruddin Haythami. Now, the reason why Nuruddin Haythami Majma' al-Zawaid, which is he gets his Zawaid from the 6 books, the 3 Ma'ajim, Muslim Ahmed, etc., right? So in the past, the Majma' al-Zawaid would be a necessary source, because how are you going to open up Muslim Ahmed? Where are you going to get Muslim Ahmed from? And if you do, how long does it take for you to search it? So now this, the Imam, he's put it into order of Sunan, and you can easily find and locate your hadith. But the reason why Majma' al-Zawaid kept its significance was because of the grading of the hadith.
Yes. His comments at the end.
The comments made it very useful. So I'm not talking about how accurate, but the fact that he's done that makes the bookstores, super necessary. But if you took that away, and you take away the fact that there's some sections that maybe start from which are not in the published editions, But now I can search those hadith up direct to the original source.
Yeah.
So if someone, for example, today cites a hadith from Majma' al-Zawaid, and I'm referencing it, for example, and I just say Majma' al-Zawaid, you say that's poor referencing, because I can take 30 seconds out to go reference to Musnad Ahmed directly.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of these books have kind of lost its use among students today. It doesn't mean it's not useful at all, but it's lost a lot of its use now. But that being said, in the past, a lot of these books attracted commentaries. So the Masābih al-Sunnah and the Mishkāt al-Masābīh, they attracted numerous commentaries. So then those books then become pivotal, because if I want to go find out a commentary on a certain hadith from certain scholars, and I can't find, let's say for example, it's in Sunan Abi Dawud, where you're in the past you have limited commentaries, I can go open up Masābih al-Sunnah. If the hadith is there will be 4 or 5 at least published commentaries. If not those in manuscript, there's tens of other commentaries for it. So this is what makes the books very useful, although we don't see the direct use as much today. Right.
I can see where even like what something I missed out in my introduction actually was that what al-Khatib al-Tabrizi actually did was he actually did write down the source where he found a hadith, and he also did clarify what was weak, what was had some problem defect, and then he mentions that in his muqaddimah that I clarified that, and then he also puts a little clause in there saying whatever I miss out, then apologies, right? So that should be for me.
So from the numbering here, I've got slightly different. So the numbering of the hadith in Masābih al-Sunnah, which remember is in the early 6th century, he passes away, right? So we're talking about, so he has, from the numbering that I have here, this is taken from Shaykh Hatim's, using the published edition to count. So he's 4,931. I think it's the same what you said. 4,931.
Okay.
And then Mishkāt was said to have 6,285.
6,285.
And that would mean that there is 1,354 more hadith in Mishkāt over Masābih. So the Fasl al-Thalith adds well over 1,000 hadith. So that's significant for what he's done. And then the Fasul, the chapter he's made, it makes it more easy. So the complication of Sahih Hisan is gone.
Yeah.
Right? That's significant. You added the Sahaba in. So the Mishkāt is seen as such an amazing collection, because what he does is he brings so many of those hadith just scattered in one place.
Yeah.
Right? And so because of that, the Masābih al-Sunnah initially, and then the Mishkāt, they get a whole host of commentaries.
Yeah.
So the most famous commentaries of Masābih al-Sunnah, which is important for students to know, Mishkāt is going to talk about in more detail, but Masābih al-Sunnah will be the commentary of al-Turabishti, right, the Hanafi scholar. So he's actually a Hanafi. Some scholars like Subki had said that he was a Shafi'i.
As he does.
He's a Hanafi.
As he does.
But here it's quite clear that he's a Hanafi. And then there is a commentary by Baydawi, right, the famous Mufassir Usuli. He's got a commentary on Masābih al-Sunnah. These two are vital commentaries, especially Turabishti is very popular. So naturally, all the commentaries then of Mishkāt is going to be a commentary of Masābih al-Sunnah as well.
Yes, necessarily.
Because those hadith are going to be included in it. So that's why that means that if you find a hadith in Masābih al-Sunnah, you'll find a commentary, you can get a commentary of Mishkāt, and you can use that. Right? And what I would say here is for people to read, I want to review this separately, but we could, inshallah, is this book of Shaykh Hatim, which is called Sharh Hadith al-Nabawi. Right? It's quite a large book. I've mentioned this in the first podcast as well. It's a very, very good book.
It's a very good book.
Right?
I should have read it.
Yeah, it's a very good book, right? If you read it, you'll find how good it is. It's a very good book. There's so much going on here in terms of the amount of meticulousness and research that he's done. It's very impressive, right? So I would highly advise people, if you want to just have a brief note about the nature of the commentaries, he's highlighted the main one. Turabishti goes into it, what the nature of the commentaries are. But the ones that we want to quickly talk about is about Mishkāt.
Yes.
Because Mishkāt is kind of installed into syllabuses from the Ottoman era.
Yes.
There's an article written by Shihab Ahmed, late Shihab Ahmed, where he talks about, there was a farman in the Ottoman era about the books to read. There's like 39 books there's a paper that he's written, 39 books that are cited amongst them in Mishkāt al-Masābīh during the Ottoman era. In every known syllabus that I've seen in the subcontinent, if you look at the book by Francis Robinson on the Farangi Mahal, the syllabus there is attributed to Mullah Nizamuddin and Dars Nizami, which has been proven to be inaccurate attribute to Mullah Nizamuddin. It's
a different topic for different
different topic, different day, right? But I'll have reference to that as well in a second. So you see there that Mishkāt was the hadith book. Many times that was the sole hadith book in many syllabuses.
That's where it finished.
We'll finish at Mishkāt al-Masābīh. And then during even Darul Deoband, so you actually have a paper on this by Mullah Nur Hassan Kandahlawi in Urdu. For those who know Urdu, I would highly advise you to read this paper. he talks about the initial syllabus of Darul Deoband and Mazhar Ulum. And then he mentions each part of the syllabus, and there he mentions the critique that the idea of Dars al-Nizami going back to Mullah Nizamuddin is an inaccurate statement. I've translated that, it's online somewhere. I did a long time ago, right? So I translated that part.
Some forum.
It's somewhere. You have to look deep. I think I mentioned my PhD, I can't remember if I did or not. But so he mentions this as well. So because of the fact that it was in so many syllabuses and how great the intiqa was, how he chose these narrations, it attracts a lot of commentaries.
Yeah.
Now, the best commentary, in my opinion, so now we're going to talk about the commentary. I'll tell you what I found great. So you have Tibi that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Ibn Hajj al-Haytami's commentary.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Ibn Hajj al-Haytami's commentary, this is published now. All right? It's available. You can purchase it. You also have a commentary by Shaykh Abdullah al-Dahlawi, which is called what's this commentary called? Lama'at Tankih. That's it. Lama'at Tankih. And then he's got he's also got a Farsi commentary as well. Right? This has been published by Dr. Taqiyuddin al-Nadwi. It's available online as well. So if you want to read more about this, just about the nature of the commentary, because it's very it's cited a lot in the subcontinent. It's an Indian scholar, right? Shaykh Abdul Haq al-Dahlawi. And he talks about Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Nadwi in the publication of his book in the introduction about the difference between the Farsi commentary that he's written and the Arabic commentary.
Okay.
So it's two different books, not translations, two different books.
Okay.
Two different commentaries written on Mishkāt. And then probably the most famous classical
Mullah
al-Qari's Mishkāt.
Mm-hmm.
And then in recent years, in the last century, you have Mir'at al-Mafatih by Ubaydullah al-Mubarakfuri. Shaykh Ubaydullah al-Mubarakfuri is a Hadith scholar, rahimahullah. And then you have Mullah Idris Kandelawi's Ta'liq al-Sabih, which is his commentary on Mishkāt. And there's a whole host of Urdu commentaries. I'm sure there's other stuff out there. But these are the famous ones that you usually come across. We don't have time to go through each one. I would love to, but it would take too long. But my advice for students, I don't know how long I'm going to take on this, but my advice on students is that I happened to come across a sharh of Tibi not knowing who Tibi was.
Mm-hmm.
So this is before I started Mishkāt, yeah. And I got hold of this. It was this exact version. I didn't know what it was. I just saw it said Sharh Mishkāt. And I thought, I'll just check it out. So when I start studying Mishkāt, I'll go through this. I didn't have, we don't have these kind of books that helps us, guides as much. Or even they were there, it wasn't accessible at that time. It's crazy. We're talking at that time. It's only like less than a decade ago, but times have shifted considerably how easy. So now, like, there's no excuse for students. Yeah. Right? If you just have this book of Shaykh Hatim, for example, you know all the main commentaries, what the benefits are, etc. Right? But just 10 years ago, unless you were connected in this amongst certain scholars or people you're connected to, you're just on your own. And so you kind of work out, but there's benefit in that. Mm-hmm. Because what happens then is you end up not being someone who learns about knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. You actually learn the knowledge.
The knowledge, yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of learning about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the issue with madkhals come into it. Can you introduce me to the Hanafi madhab? Can you give me a list of all the Hanafi scholars? Yeah. What's the best book in the Hanafi madhab? What's the mu'tamad? So you can talk about the madhab. But you can talk about fiqh, but you can't do fiqh.
Give me the hukm on this.
Exactly. You can't, I can't do that yet. Right? So this is why, although these are very, very useful and must reads, but we should still go through the process of, how do you know, if someone says, is this a good or bad book? Right? Well, how would you know a book is bad?
You have to read it.
You have to read. Someone has to go through it, right? Yeah. So there has to be someone that goes to do it. But we normally want to have just the best books. Yeah. I don't want to go through that. Just give me the best stuff. But that's not what the muhaqqiq does. Muhaqqiq has to go through all sorts of stuff, right? Or research has to go through all sorts of things.
That requires effort and time.
It requires effort and time, yeah. So anyway, I came across this, Shaykh Tibi. Now, of course, we know that it's his teacher that wrote. It's an amazing story, right? But I would say to students, because what happens is with Mirqat, and for teachers as well, by the way, right? So when you're teaching Mishkāt, you of course, you have the larger commentaries, like Mirqat we have. Ibn Hajj al-Haytami's commentary is there as well. And Mullah al-Qari being a Hanafi scholar, he mentions a lot of the Hanafi Masail in there. You've got the introduction by Mullah Abdul Halim Chishti that I sent to you. Yes. The late Mullah Abdul Halim Chishti, rahimahullah, passed away recently, a few years ago.
Which is very good, by the way.
Very good introduction, right, to the to Mirqat. So if anyone's interested.
That's why I didn't get to read that.
Personally, but he cites it as well. So he cites Mullah Abdul Halim Chishti's introduction as well of Mirqat. It's very useful. So if anyone wants to read about the commentary of Mirqat and Mullah al-Qari, the introduction by Mullah Abdul Halim Chishti is very good. I don't know if you can do this with too much headache with editors, but the names of books that we mentioned, if they can put a picture up, I don't know, right? But it'd be very useful. You do that? Great. So it'll be more effort, but it'll be worth it for people to know what we're talking about, because sometimes the names are too fast. People say, I'm not doing
like those other names.
Yeah. So Anyway, so this sharh, in my opinion, and even now this is when I was reading it, and now when I read this as well, similar, is that this I would say is the commentary you want to have, because Mirqat is very large.
Very large.
So what you want to do is when you have, let's say when you do Bukhari, right? So you're studying Sahih Bukhari or you're teaching Sahih Bukhari. Now, of course, the best commentary Sahih Bukhari is Fathul Bari, but it's not practical to be reading Fathul Bari if you're doing a number of Dawrah Hadith. Even if you have a whole year, it's very, very difficult if you've got other classes to do, right?
You've got 6-7 pages on a single Hadith.
Exactly, and it's not just easy reads as well. There's a lot of technical jargon in there, so you have to really be on your toe, like on your A game, right, to try to understand what's going on. So it's very difficult for students. So what I would say is that when you go to books like Mishkāt and Masābih, what you want to do is you have your Mirqat there, right? You can have something like the Ta'liq al-Sabiya wa Idris Kandalawi, if you want to understand the more Ahl Hadith view, right? There's no problem. You can have your Mir'at, whatever these larger commentaries there, right? So Mullah al-Qari will be one of those. And then you have Sharatibi. Because Sharatibi, what he does is he mentioned that the subtle points of the Hadith, it's not too long, so it's actually doable that you can easily read through it as well. So if you actually have the Sharatibi, right? So if you can see it, right? So,
how many volumes is this in?
It's 10 volumes. It sounds look, but it's quite big, right?
Yeah.
So you see here, the writing is quite large, and then you have the commentary, which is around this. Is it?
It's quite bright.
Okay, you don't have to. You put a picture up after this.
Yeah, we'll put a picture up.
It's available online. It's not too difficult to find, right?
People can find it.
But so what happens in the commentary is that you can easily. So he mentions subtleties. He mentioned dabt and gharib al-fad. And as a student, when you're studying, as a teacher, when you're teaching books of hadith, and you have a great amount of content to do, then what you want to do is you want to have something like this, which you can digest, understand the hadith, and then if something you're stuck on, and then you can go to the larger commentaries.
Yeah.
Right? Because rather than actually starting with larger commentaries, then it becomes very difficult to consistently do something. Whereas this way, you can spend the year or two in the Mishkāt, you're studying as a student or teaching as a teacher, you can actually finish a full commentary, which is rare for people to do, right? Because it's just too much you're doing. So you have to have, and I think Imam Tibi does an amazing job in this, and all the scholars after, so even Shaykh Abdullah notes this, how numerous scholars, right, have cited Imam Tibi in so many places, sometimes mentioning his name, but sometimes without mentioning his name.
Yeah.
So like Imam Munawi has, I think, 700 he mentions, right? It's based studies on the dirasa that someone counts it. 700 citations to the Imam Tibi's sharh. So I would say to students, right, I would say to students that you need to, if you want to have a commentary Mishkāt, this is your comment. This is my opinion.
Okay.
This is the commentary you want.
Okay.
Right. And when it comes to teaching Mishkāt or teaching Hadith, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about that off topic, right? But how to, I believe, one of the better ways of teaching Hadith, maybe we can discuss that. But that's in a nutshell when we're talking about Mishkāt al-Masābih.
Yeah. I think for a student who has no time or very little time, has to make use of what he read, has to really pick what he needs to read, the essentials, etc. I think you're right.
Not only that, I'll tell you why, right? Okay. It's not just about the hadith, the size itself.
Okay.
The reason being is that when you're looking at sciences like fiqh, you're looking at science like usul, there the maqsood is the science, right? It's not the kitab itself. So when you're learning hidayah, right? Hidayah is a tool for you to learn the fiqh.
Yes.
Right? Hidayah itself, right? If you change it, of course, it's a great book, great, right? But if you can shift that to another book that does a job, it does a job.
Yeah.
So you can be sitting there reading all the commentaries you want, no problem. But what happens is that when you're doing a hadith, right, the maqsood of that is the prophetic hadith.
Yes.
And there's more benefit to hadith than just the hukam. Because you are trying to hear what the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is saying. You're trying to understand how the Sahaba interact, how do they engage the Messenger of Allah. But of course, a lot of the books of the sharh is going to be about the legal issues, right? Yeah. They'll go into other topics.
Sometimes the hadith gets lost in all of that.
And it gets lost, definitely. And if you go to many students that have done Bukhari year or Mishkāt year, and you say, oh, yeah, hadith, which hadith? It's in Bukhari. So I don't remember that. And the reason being is either because they weren't listening in class, right? Or normally what happens is so much kalam being done, or when they're reading it, they're reading so much other things that the words get lost. It's similar to Quran tarjuma.
Yeah.
If you're doing Quran tarjuma or you're doing translation of the Quran, you want to do a much more tadabbur-based approach of the Quran rather than initially starting off that with shuruhat.
Yeah.
Tafsirs. Because when you do too much tafsir in the beginning, the Quranic alfaz get lost.
Yeah.
So you want to have of course, commentaries, the exegesis are there that you want to use for help, but you want to have a direct understanding of what Allah is saying to you in these verses so you can have the impact that is desired from it. But if I'm saying, Alhamd, what's Alif Lam mean? Why Alif Lam is there? What's istighraq? And so you kind of miss the whole purpose of the verse.
You're focusing on the pixel and missing the picture.
Exactly. So what you want to do is, these commentaries are very important.
Yeah.
But you want to first build a connection with the text, because that's what's maqsood here.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, then secondary, you go to the larger commentaries and tafasir, and you use that. This is how I think it should be done. A lot of the times when we're teaching hadith, maybe people disagree and get angry about this, right? When we're teaching hadith, one of the mistakes we do is, like, for example, if I'm teaching you Bukhari, right? So we first start off the Bukhari and I'm going for excessive kalam. Now, if this is my research, because we're going to do a review, inshallah, of the book by, the recent one published by Allama Kashmiri's Dictations of Sunan Abi Dawud, published by Mawlana Mahfuz.
The one, recent one.
Recent one, yeah. So there, a lot of the time, Allama Kashmiri, this is his tahqiq.
Yeah.
So if I'm teaching Bukhari and I have my own analysis, then I understand why you can produce it to the students and say, this is what I found. Even if it's, if you may think you're talking a lot, but it's something that you've done, some research you've done, something you've got original to provide. But if I'm just quoting, doing Sahih Muslim and reading Sharh of Imam Nawawi, and then class is translating it to you, then I'm saying is, why not just fix to your gharib al-fadh, basic ma'ani of hadith, understand what the tadabbur of the al-fadh, right? And then say to you, for more, read the Nawawi's kalam. For more, read this. That, I think, will be much more of a conducive way. That way you can actually go for the whole year rather than having 4 months of excessive kalam and then doing, zooming through Baqarah right at the end.
Which is usually what happens.
Which usually happens in most madrasas, right? So this is just some advice. For, in terms of Mishkāt, that would be my point regarding that. Yeah. Is there anything you want to say, Mishkāt? One other point I want to say after that.
So I think as well, because I have Mirqat at home, and I definitely relate to the fact that it becomes very difficult to, if you're not consistently, even sometimes forcing yourself to read it, it was very difficult, because Mullah al-Qari, he's like the ultimate sharih. He's done sharh of everything. And in Mirqat, it's like he's doing sharh and he's bringing every single thing that he can think of, he's putting it under the hadith. And so when you're reading it, you're trying to focus on the hadith, understand the hadith, and then he's got so many different branches he wants to talk about. You sometimes forget, what was the hadith I'm talking about? You have to go back to the bottom page. Oh, he's talking about that hadith, not this one. Then you go back to the sharh, okay, find out. And it becomes very tedious like that.
There's some points in the tadabbur hadith that I want to talk about, but that will be about some other topics.
Okay.
In the future, because I don't want to go into it just yet. It'll be nice, some nice points, I think some interesting points about that.
So one more point on Mishkāt before we move on to Zujajah and Masābih, that I would want to mention as well, is that both of the scholars that wrote Masābih Sunnah and Mishkāt, they were Shafi'i. Yeah. And, and the scholar that wrote Zujajah, he's a Hanafi. And here comes a bit of a contrast in the contributions to ilm al-hadith, or the science of hadith, in its various different forms, that the Shafi'i scholars had a much more significant contribution to the field of hadith than the Hanafi scholars. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's a fair statement to make? Or do you think...
Well, if you're going to weigh up in terms of like the famous names, I think it's very difficult to argue against that. If you're just getting all the famous names that we are, the known names, right? Otherwise, like if you look at some of the asanid of how Bukhari has been transmitted, the early transmitters of Bukhari, you see a lot of Hanafis on there. If you want to say people like Yahya Ma'in, these people are in nisbah to Hanafi madhab, then there's a lot of people, right? But in terms of like the, especially post-madhab, famous Hanafi scholars, famous Shafi'i scholars in the field of hadith, and the go-to books. So let's say the go-to books of Rijal during the Mamluk era, right? So we've got like the Tahdhib al-Kamal, Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, the Kashif, then you've got the Ulum al-Quran, Ulum al-Hadith, so Ibn Salah, you've got your Suyuti, you've got all of these scholars. So a lot of them is dominated by Shafi'i. And it's not to say Hanafis have had a role in that, right? You've got the Mughlatais, Al-Aini, Ibn Humam. Before that, of course, you have Tahawi, Jassas, and there's numerous other Hanafi scholars that have come to light now, like not light to now, but I'm saying the other scholars have also made meaningful contribution to the field of hadith, whether it's in the form of commentary or we're talking about asanid as well, right? So even like scholar Durabishti, we mentioned, is a Hanafi scholar, so a lot of the things he does discuss in terms of the commentary of the hadith. So there's a whole host of scholars, but if you're saying, who are the standout names when you're doing ulum al-hadith or you're doing rijal and the books that have been collected, where are they mostly have their nisbah to, then it will be generally accurate to say the Shafi'is were more dominant. But that doesn't mean that the Hanafis didn't have a role to play in that.
Do you think then, following on from that, do you think that then the science of hadith was something which was influenced in terms of it has a Shafi'i flavor to it?
This is a very interesting question. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I want to not answer that now. All right? No, I'll tell you why.
Cliffhanger.
No, if you can say a cliffhanger, right? Not that I don't, but I think that would be much more nice when we discuss دراسات في علوم الحديث المذهب الحنفية. So Hanafi usul hadith.
Okay.
We'll do a couple of books on those, and then we can dive proper deep. Otherwise,
stay tuned.
Well, yeah, depending on whenever we do it, right? Maybe whenever we do it, right? But there's a lot to say about that.
Okay.
So I would rather do it as part of a review, because otherwise, I don't want to do it half.
No, I understand.
Stuff, right?
I understand.
But there's a lot to say about that. That's fine. But just one last point on this, so we can easily then shift towards this, right? Is that regarding Mishkāt al-Masābīh, you do have the issue, like you mentioned, Masābih of Sunnah. There are hadith in Mishkāt that sometimes Imam Khatib Tabrizi mentions some issue with it sometimes. And then you have Ibn Hajar, who's got a takhrij on Mishkāt al-Masābīh, which is called Hidayat al-Ruwād. And he's got some interesting principle in there that he goes, when I don't do a hukum on a hadith, it's Hasan. That's interesting because we'll relate to the next book why he says there's a hukum on it. And this is where Shaykh Albani has also done a takhrij on the Mishkāt al-Masābīh. So that's just something to note. So in terms of grading of the hadith, because a lot of the commentaries we're talking about, they have not done much. I think other than Mir'āt al-Mafatih of Ubaydullah Mubarakfuri, Shaykh Ubaydullah Mubarakfuri rahimahullah, I haven't seen the others do much kalam on the asanid of the hadith. But there are some issues with some of the citations. So for example, in Fasl al-Thalith, you see Imam Khatib Tabrizi relies upon Razin ibn Muawiyah, right? And this is an interesting figure who collected a book which has the hadith from I think he collects the Muwatta, Sahihain, and the collections together. But what he does also is he adds other hadith in there where it's not really sourced. We don't know where there's debate about where he's getting these narrations from. So when Razin is cited and he's your lone source and it's not found in other books, there's been great question marks regarding that. There's a famous debate about Salatul Raghaib.
Yes.
Salatul Rajab. And that actually goes back to a hadith that was cited by Razin. So if anyone wants to read about the debate between Izzuddin Abdus Salam and Ibn Salah, which is available online, you can Google it. The book comes up, the answer by Ibn Salam, Ibn Salah's response, counter response, right? It actually goes, one of the madar of that discussion goes back to Razin, and he's the one who cites the hadith. So there are some hadith like that in the Mishkāt that have this, that has a Razin as a citation. And if you go back to his original source, it's severely weak. So there's one narration that comes up in Mishkāt, which is the hadith narrated from Ali radiallahu anhu. He says, نعم الرجل الفقيه في الدين إن احتيج إليه نفع وإن استغني عنه أغنى نفسه. This is رواه Razin. And this, even in Mir'āt al-Mafatih, he references it back to Ibn Asakir's Tariq Dimashq, and he mentioned that there's narrators in there being accused of lying. Right, and that's why even later when Shaykh Albani does the takhrij of this, he also grades it as fabricated as well. Ibn Hajar said, I couldn't find the isnad for it into Ruwāt al-Hidayah. Hidayat al-Ruwād. So these are some things to kind of look out for. If it's just a Razin, I'll say students to be a bit more think or look into some of these takhrij works and to kind of check what they've said. Because a lot of the commentaries are not necessarily going to be discussing much of the isnad discussions.
Okay. One point to mention or to look out for, the Zujajah al-Masābīh. Now, you mentioned to me that because when we were discussing how to do this podcast, and you told me to do Mishkāt, and which I didn't do well, but you said that we hope the Zujajah al-Masābīh. You said that the scholars'
biography. What's funny is that it turns out that I was wrong and you're right. That would be a good twist. I apologize to you next episode.
Yeah, anyway, we hope you don't have to. The Zujajah al-Masābīh, you said that the biography was written in Urdu. It's not available in Arabic. This is where my inqita' comes in. I can't access it. So you had to rely on you for this.
So let's talk about, so we mentioned a concern about the Hanafi usul. I don't want to delve into that, but there's something to delve into.
Okay.
Is that a lot of scholars even like Al-Aini, in his commentary on Sahih Bukhari, Mulla al-Liqari, his commentary on Mishkāt al-Masābīh, they do, and then of course the many deobandi scholars and even people from like Imam Laknawi and other scholars like that, they contribute significantly to say that a lot of these hadith works, the authors present a certain hadith to suggest something, right? And this is something that Shaykh Hatim talks about in Sharh Hadith. He goes at a book which is mubawwab. It has babs. It's a form of commentary.
Yes.
Because when you put a bab, you're trying to tell us what you're saying at the same time. So it's not just a collection, a neutral collection. There's actually something that's been trying to demonstrate. So these Hanafi scholars did see a need to kind of, defend the madhab, which I don't think Shaykh Hatim likes too much. He doesn't really like that fact that they did that. But
he sticks to that likulli fannin rijal.
Yeah, that kind of notion.
This is
and we can discuss Shaykh Hatim's manhaj on a general different. There's a lot of stuff we discuss, but we'll be here for hours and hours, right? But I'm trying to not delve into stuff too much. Right?
I apologize.
No, it's my fault. I'm picking up. So anyway, so you have that kind of concern. So now you've got Mishkāt al-Masābīh. Now you mentioned Masābih Sunnah is a Shafi'i. Mishkāt al-Masābīh is a Shafi'i. And a lot of the hadith that are being brought forward, whether intentionally, as the Hanafi scholars would say, or it was just, this is what is sahih, right, was presented forward, is actually mentioned in contrast to the Hanafi position. Yep. So what happens is that then a lot of the authors that are writing commentaries on Mishkāt or teaching Mishkāt, if you might, right, they're going to be trying to cite to the say, okay, this hadith is there. So that's not every hadith, by the way. That's another thing. Remember, there's abwab in Mishkāt. It's not just touching hadith ahkam. There's fitan, all sorts of abwab in there, right? That are not just, the Hanafi always on guard trying to refute stuff, right? And there's a lot of hadith that we accept.
Yeah.
So it's not like that. But the notion of there are hadith in there that are mentioned. So you're constantly trying to defend and then you're trying to mention the hadith in commentaries. But the student who's just got in front of him has Mishkāt al-Masābīh. So a concern that comes about is that we don't have like an alternative collection, because this is all madrasas, but you have to do something alternative. And so this is where the Shaykh Abul Hasanat Abdullah al-Hayderabadi, known as Muhaddis al-Dakkan, rahimahullah, right? He comes along and he makes this attempt to say that, you know what, I'm going to write a collection of hadith on the same outline as Mishkāt al-Masābīh. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add therein evidences of the Hanafi madhab.
Okay.
Right? So not all the time. Right? So it's not all he does, right? But he's going to add other hadith as well that he thinks are relevant for other sources. We'll come back to what he does. But that's the main idea, is that the notion, he says himself in the introduction, that I'm going to add narrations in there that are going to be supporting the Hanafi madhab.
Okay.
And so that's the general outline or the goal, if you like.
That's his purpose for the book.
That's the main purpose of the book. And he's quite clear about that in the introduction. So it's good right now to actually mention the book itself. Why are we doing this book? Right? Because it's a recent publication of it.
Yes.
So this is where we're going to, speak a bit highly of one of our local in the UK-based publications, Maktab Ismaeel.
Plug it in.
I'm not getting paid for this, right?
Yeah.
Right. This is Maktab Ismaeel.
But we wouldn't mind.
No. So this is Maktab Ismaeel, which are doing an amazing job, right? It's an amazing job they're doing, and for someone in the West, in the UK, America, these kind of countries, to be publishing high quality Arabic works is a immense benefit, is immense ni'mah for us. And the fact that the person who runs it, he's open to people writing the books to them, getting books to them. He helps students in terms of editing, all sorts of things, right? So the Maktab Ismaeel have done an amazing job in the publication of books, and the editions are amazing as well in terms of, just before we look at the content of, because that's the publishing of the books, what I'm saying, right? But in terms of, we spoke about even the Inaya of Mona Yusuf, same thing. Yeah. They published this. They're doing a lot of effort with very nice publications, and they're local in the UK. They're based in. So this is in that sense. So they worked on this book. The editor, whose name is Shaykh Abu Sahal Muhammad Sa'ad Shaykh Rahmatullah, who is based in Medina. Okay. I think I'm not sure if he's Pakistani or he's subcontinent originally, but he's based in Medina. I've spoken to him because he speaks Urdu as well, right? So he's based in Medina, and that's where he does a lot of tahqiq. So he actually edits books as well. He edits people's works. So if you've got something, you're working on something, he'll edit it for you and stuff, right? So he does that service as well. So he's worked on this. And so they came out with this in 5 volumes, right? And it's very, very nice in terms of the outline. The editor attempts to be very meticulous in terms of the dabt as well.
Okay.
The harakat, the Arab is, usually, from what I've seen, very little mistakes that I've seen.
Good takhrij, etc.
Yeah, we'll talk about takhrij and stuff in a second, but I'm saying that's what.
Okay. So
the book itself, so Maktab Ismaeel should be something that should be praised, and we should try to support these kind of thing by purchasing books, etc. from them.
Yes.
So if you have the money, people can, we do have the concern about, we should be paying, books are quite expensive. People will complain about that. But these are people that are doing a great service to us. So in my opinion, because maybe sometimes students that are coming about now, they may not see the significance of this service or what people are doing. Whereas, just like I said, just 10 years ago, if I wanted to buy a book, right, I had to sometimes go and contact the actual publishing house in some place in Jordan or something, right? And then they will send over the book. They will charge crazy amount of money. Shipping, etc. And I was like 17, 18, I'm trying to look Western Union. I don't know what I'm doing. At one point, I sent so much money off. I didn't know if it was legit or not, right? So I sent £300 off, and I was trying to buy the Mawsu'a of Shaykh Abdullah, and it was not in stock, and I was going to sell it here. So I spent like £300 for Western Union, and it was just silent after that. So I was waiting, right? Is someone going to waste 250? I can't remember how much it was, £250, right? And then eventually it did come. So thank God, right? But if it didn't, I don't know what to do. Yeah. Right. So when you have these kind of publishing, we have booksellers, number one, which is significant. So all the guys we have, right? Zakaria books, Qurtuba books, all these kind of guys, right? There's Maktab Abu Hanifa. There is, I don't want to stop saying names now, right? But the names, a lot of the names, right? Yeah, I don't know the names of all of them, right? But with these guys are going, the one next step is saying, no, not only are we going to be selling books, we're going to publish works as well, and of a high quality. Yeah. It's very impressive. Yeah. So that's one thing. So we should support these efforts. Yeah. Right? I'm not making a penny out of this, right? Just to make it clear, right? So it's not like by you buying this, I'm making any benefit. I'm
Commission of 10%.
Yeah, there's nothing that I'm getting out of this. So I'm saying is, but we should be supporting these people as much as possible. So when new books come out, right? If it's something that, you should try to purchase it, you can gift it to people, it's very nice, right? So that's just about Maktab Ismaeel. I think it's important to mention.
I think generally Muslim businesses across the board, any industry,
but this is just local. That's what I'm saying.
And it's new, so it needs even more support because these things are hard to do.
It's good quality stuff. It's not just support because we feel sorry for them, right? Yeah. It's good stuff. So it
deserves that mention.
Yeah. So that's in terms of the publishing house. But back to the author we're talking about, right? So if this book, Zujajah Masābih, was originally published in 1951, I believe.
So very recent.
Recent, yeah. So the Shaykh passed away in 1964.
Okay.
All right. So 1964 he passes away in, and this book is published in 1951. And the Shaykh, so the editions, if you go online and you Google it, you'll find the Maktabat al-Bushra print, because there were some madaris. Bushra kind of focus a lot of the books that are part of syllabuses. So there have been some madaris that I believe have incorporated this in some way into syllabus. We'll talk about how that could potentially be done. Okay. So Maktab Bushra have published them, and there's a decent biography in Arabic, not super long. There's a decent amount of biography about him in there. And in this work, this new edition, is a very short biography, like a page long.
Oh,
yeah. So in Arabic, you don't get, I've not seen any excessively long biography. I also had a peek into al-Jawahir al-Mudiyya by Shaykh Abdullah, the Bengali scholar who done this large book on Hanafi Tabaqat. I didn't see his name in there. I may be mistaken. I did a brief look, but I didn't see it in there. Maybe it's there. Allah knows best, right?
Is the Bushra print the big one?
The big one, yeah. The big Bushra print, yes. So you find it online if you look at it. So there's not much known, in Arabic I'm saying, so that being said, right? In Urdu, there are a few, quite detailed biographies about the Shaykh, right? One of them being by his own student, and this is in Urdu, right? It's in Urdu. One being by his own student, Professor Muhammad Abdul Sattar, right? He writes a lengthy biography which is called Tadhkiratu Hadrat Muhaddis al-Dakkan, right? One of the reasons I was reading through it for the last few weeks and just been going through it, but one of the problems that I had was that he goes off talking about other topics away from the life of the Shaykh. So he'll go and talk about if some masla comes up, he'll start talking about that. So although it's very useful, it is very useful because I didn't go much beyond that, right? This is one I had access to. So, and he's a student, so he has a personal interaction. He actually works on so this has been translated in Urdu as well, the Masābih, which is the lifetime of the Shaykh. So he talks about when he sat with the Shaykh, how he learned it, how he worked on the publication of it, he worked with his son. So he's very intimately connected to Professor Abdul Sattar. So you would expect his biography to be a very authoritative biography as well, because he's a student, right? So what's interesting here is that, in the beginning we spoke about deobandi, right? And a few episodes before we were talking a bit about Brelvism or the deobandi, the maqasid al-nutbi issue, right? And what happens is that, this is something I mentioned in my PhD as well, is that a lot of people when we talk about the subcontinent, we have a simple divide of subcontinent of the Ahli Hadith, the Deobandis, and the Barelvis, right? And that's what we talk about. And then no, but then everyone else is somehow linked towards that.
Yeah.
So what we do, we have like a lazy approach to this. We say, oh, this guy, what are you, a Hanafi? Okay, well, you do Mawlid, right? Okay, you're a Barelvi, right? Or there's a Asian dude who's gone studied in Syria, and again, you see him dressed a certain way. So, oh, this guy's a Barelvi, right? Or this, like, we had this kind of very loose association with that, and especially, and then if you go find an earlier scholar, what is he? So you had Mu'abdah al-Laknawi. Well, Mu'abdah al-Laknawi was very hadith orientated. He had a relationship with some of the Deobandi scholars. Oh, he's Deobandi, despite him being part of a completely different school, the Farangi Mahal school, right? So we have this kind of, or anyone that's doing amal bil hadith in whatever sense, we say Ahl Hadith, right? So whenever a new person pops up, we have to quickly push them into one.
Put him in the little box that we've created.
Yeah, some of these boxes. So the reality is that yes, you have people that follow Mullah Ahmad Raza Khan that were very anti-Deobandi, did takfir of Deobandi scholars. We know this, right? And then you have scholars that are Deobandi in the sense that associated with the madrasa of Deoband, right? And again, like I said, a broader school. And you have Ahli Hadith, those who were opposed the issue of taqleed and said we should do more direct hadith. But then the Ahli Hadith, or those who consider Ahli Hadith, can be of a spectrum. Those who be more modest, maybe those are more amongst the muhaddithin. There'll be a whole host of different spectrum there, right? Because remember, none of these groups are, especially the latter two, are not associated to a single person. So you're going to have much more broader form of there'll be less conformity. Whereas if you're saying that you're from Ahmad Khan, there'll be more conformity in your views. But that being said, there was a whole host of scholarly families, because that's what would happen, right? You have like areas and you have scholarly families that go back generations. Even today, you go to certain parts of Pakistan, you go to certain parts of India, and you have like the local religious family, and they've had scholars in their family for centuries, and they're not necessarily studying Darul Deoband, right? They have no connection to Darul Deoband. They have their own scholarly lineage. Although as these madaris have become more and more widespread, what happens, a lot of these families or groups, they've kind of, or we say families, they kind of merge into some of these other madaris. Okay. So what would happen, I'll give you an example, right? So let's say Ludhiana in northern India. There you had a scholarly tradition, a family of ulama, right? Now Darul Deoband opens up. They're not Deobandi, they've got no connection, it's just another Darul. But then what would happen is, if I see, okay, these scholars of Ludhiana, they say we like these scholars from Darul Deoband, we get along with them. They are contemporaries. Yeah. So let's say, for example, you open a madrasa, we're contemporaries, and I like your way of teaching. So what's going to happen is, instead of we going back to our informal or the method of just teaching in our own regions, right, and then having to travel down to different shuyukh, so you know what, go to Darul Deoband. Yeah. So then those scholarly families sometimes just merged into the madrasas, and their family kind of connected to it, and they became part of the Deoband, whatever tradition they became part of these madaris. But there were other people that kind of didn't fit into this mold. And he's one of these people. So when Abdullah al-Hayderabadi, he was someone that was pro-Mawlid. If you go online, I just saw this, someone sent me a link of this, Urs they do of his, right? This is like the death anniversary of his, right? And so that being said, so he's not a Deobandi, right? He's not studying in Deobandi Madaris. What's interesting is that he's one of his two major teachers link him back, they were the sons of Ahmad Ali Sahanpuri.
Okay.
Right, the famous Shaykh Ahmad Sahanpuri, who done the Hashian Sahih Bukhari, published Sahih Bukhari. There's a book by Mufti Muntasir, a small work you may have seen, where he talks about Ahmad Sahanpuri's contributions. He was the teacher of Mullah Qasim and Notwi. So his sons, Mullah Abdullah Hayderabadi was a student of theirs, amongst other people.
You would assume then they would be similar in mindset and ideas.
They do, but I'm saying is, but he was, like I said, he wasn't a Deobandi by any stretch, right? But at the same time, if you look at his student of his, the Professor Abdul Sattar, he has a section where he praises Mullah Ahmad Raza Khan. So he did a great effort to preserve the Sunnah. But then he says that my teacher, Mullah Abdullah Hayderabadi, and Abu al-Wafa al-Afghani were connected, they were close together. We'll talk about Abu al-Wafa al-Afghani, the famous Hanafis scholar as well, maybe later. He was one of the Uzzab, never got married, Abu al-Wafa al-Afghani. Shaykh Abdullah Bukhud actually mentions him in his book. But we'll talk about another time. But anyway, so he goes, them two, the author of this book, despite this praise that he gives to Mullah Ahmad Raza Khan himself, I'm not sure if it starts to him, but whatever he does, right? He goes, he told me to go on Tabligh. So then he spoke about his time with Mullah Ilyas and how amazing it was. Then he talks about how Tabligh's moved away from what Mullah Ilyas was on. But Mullah Ilyas as a person, he goes, this was like spending time with the Sahaba. That's how he kind of mentions it. It was so amazing. But that's advice from Mullah Abdullah Hayderabadi. So there are scholars and traditions within the subcontinent that don't neatly fit into our strict demarcating of saying, well, this is this group, this is that group, this is that group.
Nor do they need to be.
Yeah.
Nor does anyone.
They have their own scholarly lineage.
Exactly.
They have their own tradition going back, and it's a whole host of people.
Yeah.
And it's something that has been understudied. Because you have like the ulama of Rampur. Like you said, we have Hyderabad. You have these kind of areas, and a lot of them have their own scholarly lineages. It's not something that has been understudied. Because naturally our focus is on the famous groups, right? But these others that sometimes just get loosely mentioned as being, or they're Barelvi, or they're deobandi, or they're this or that, when they don't neatly fit into our categories, but you say, well, let's just study what they are.
Yeah.
What are their views? What do they hold on to? One of the Laknawi. He's from Farangi Mahal. He's hadith orientated. A lot of the deobandi scholars are far more hadith oriented, more into naqliyat. So you see a good connection between that. And then remember, in the earlier stages, there's a lot of overlap. So Abdul Laknawi is on very close terms with Gangohi. It's actually in the Baqiyat Fatawa Rashidiyya by Manur Hassan. Yeah, she mentions the Abdul Laknawi asked Gangohi questions to answer him back. So he's on very close terms with him. So there's a whole host of things to talk about there. That's a very interesting fact about Abdullah al-Hayderabadi, known as Muhaddis al-Dakkan.
Okay. So you've already mentioned the aims of his book. That he's, you know, he was trying to make a book that was focused on the Hanafi Dala'il from Hadith, on the Tartib, on the ordering and the kind of the same framework as al-Khatib al-Tabrizi in his Mishkāt. Now, were there any other aims that we should mention, or was that the most?
That's not what he's. So, in terms of his aim, that's his aim.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. But that being said, he does other stuff as well.
Okay.
Now, so about this edition, to just talk about it, right? That there is taqrizat, one from Sheikh Salman, the son of Sheikh Abdul Fattah Bughudda, and a few other ulama. This book itself was praised by Sheikh Abdul Fattah Bughudda highly. You see it, if you look in the Bushra print, you'll see a letter that he writes about when he receives it, how happy he was. And then in the Mabadi' fi Ulum al-Hadith of Shafi'i Ahmed Uthmani, in the introduction, if you remember, we read this, he praises the book Zujajah Masābih in there as well, as being a great book. There's also one thing here that I found interesting. I actually messaged the Maktab Ismaeel to ask the editor. So if I get corrected on this, I would mention it in the next episode. I'll mention the comments, right? That he mentions here a quotation about people praising the book. So it's not reference, but he's got like a praise of Manzoor Nu'mani, which you know praised it. And he's got a praise of Shaykh Abdullah Bughudda that we know praised it. But he says here a statement from Shaykh Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah. He says, إن هذا التأليف مستطاب من ذكريات هذا العصر الجديد ومآثره إذ هو أهم الكتب التي ألفت في هذا الفن الشريف جزاه الله خيرا. But I don't know, because from what I know, the book was published in 1951, and Allama Kashmiri passed away way before that. So I'm not too sure whether, because it's not referenced here. It's just one of those, you have these kind of blurbs that is just kind of from the beginning, right? So I did ask, so if I do get corrected on that there was actually access he had to it somehow, or you heard about it, or whatever, read some parts of it that was before publication, I will clarify in the comments. But there's no reference. I was just a bit intrigued to know how Allama Kashmiri came across this book. So it'll be interesting to know about that.
So now we've understood the aims of this book, right? But what is the author wanted to present this book. Now, you mentioned that some of the madaris actually took this book on as a replacement of Mishkāt.
I don't know about replacement, but I know because there were people that incorporate into the madrasa
as a supplement.
Well, this is it. So Qadi Tayyib, the famous head of Darul Deoband up to the 70s, he writes a taqreez to this book in Urdu on the Maktab Bushra print. And he says that this book should be used as a supplement or as an exchange for Mishkāt al-Masābīh. I'm not too sure about exchange. I'll tell you why after, right? But as a supplement, I'm okay with. I think that makes sense, right? So as a supplement, so I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know which madrasas, but the fact that Maktab Bushra have printed it as such, I'm pretty sure there'll be some madrasas out there that do use it to some degree. But because it's not that popular, it's not become that popular amongst students right now, and that's why this edition, I think, would kind of gain popularity amongst people and raise awareness about people, especially your students. Every year you always get Mishkāt students, so you're looking about every beginning of the year what books to get, right? So this would be something useful for that. But should it be as a replacement? Although Qadi Tayyib does say that, I don't know if that's, would be. So I'll tell you why.
Any particular reason why?
I'll tell you why I don't think, right, for that. So now, what does he do in this book? So I'm gonna first talk about the book itself, and then talk about some of the comments about the author, and then I'll mention a few things that I came across as I was reading it. So the book, where it differs from Mishkāt al-Masābīh, is that and some of the stuff there's a small dirasa, not lengthy, right? It's a small dirasa by the editor, which touches upon some points, but it's not exhaustive. So maybe if there was to be a and improving the introduction, I think maybe a bit more deeper dirasa of the book would be quite useful. But that's not found, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
But it would be nice so we can be a bit more clear of what's going on. So anyway, so he starts off every chapter with ayatul Quran, relevant to the section, which is not found in Mishkāt.
Yes.
Right. So if you look at the very beginning, Kitab al-Iman, the first ayah starts with وَقَلْبُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمان. So he starts off like this, right? And if you go to Kitab al-Salah, he'll bring it for that. If it's Sifatu Salah, whatever it is, he will bring the relevant ayat that he sees to the chapter, which is useful.
Yes.
So straight away as a supplement, that's great. Because if you as a teacher, as a student, you want to know what relevant ayat are to this subject matter, then you've got those, and he puts all of them together in the beginning. So that's number one difference. Number two, and this is why I said that it's a bit difficult, because he takes out all the fusul of Khatib Tabrizi.
Okay.
Right, so Fasl Thani doesn't begin like that.
So the framework's gone.
Framework's gone.
Okay.
And nor does he necessarily begin with the hadith of Bukhari Muslim.
Okay.
Right. So for example, I've got various stuff highlighted here. So let's see if I find them all. So let's say, so Kitab al-Salah, right? The very first hadith Kitab al-Salah, he cites, which is that من علم أن الصلاة حق واجب دخل الجنة رواه أحمد والحاكم في المستدرك.
He's quoting Ahmed and Hakim for the first thing.
First hadith.
Okay.
Right. And then getting tired? You right? You keep this in, no problem. You're tired. By the way, for those who don't know, this is 12:40 right now at night, so that's why everyone's a bit tired. I was tired, but I'm all right now. So, to your detriment, I'm okay now, right?
Yeah.
So just stay here listening, right? And so then the second, so then that's the first hadith. The second hadith he cites to Abu Nu'aym, and then to some other sources as well he cites, right? Okay. So it's not.
But is that based on any particular reason? So is there a particular reason why he would choose the hadith of Ahmad and Mustadrak al-Hakim?
It doesn't mention that, right? So what I would assume is that he in his mind is looking at it from a more matan perspective than in terms of the kitab that it's in. So not ordering it in that perspective. So for example, this is Kitab al-Salah, right? So the first hadith matnan that makes the most relevant to the chapter will be Man alima anna salata haqqun wajib dakhil al-jannah.
Okay.
So it's about knowing about salah.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how he starts it off.
Makes sense.
So he does it by matan wise rather than the hadith or way that Mishkāt al-Masābih does.
Yeah.
So that's so now for example in Kitab al-Salah, the first section of Kitab al-Salah, he has it's just I'm going through the section just to give you a bit of an estimate, right? So there are 29 hadith in the first section of Kitab al-Salah, so much larger, right? So first there's 29 hadith. 15 of the hadith are from 16 are from Mishkāt. So the all 16 hadith in this section are in Mishkāt al-Masābīh is here.
Okay.
But then he adds 13 hadith.
Okay.
So in this section, you have the hadith of Mishkāt al-Masābīh are here, all of them. But then he adds 13. Right? So he's supplementing it.
Yes.
So then I thought maybe that, and then the sources he used, I was also be fascinated to know like how he was citing from them, because he cites a whole host of sources, much more broader than what Mishkāt does.
Okay.
So like for example, I made a list of some of the sources, and it's in the beginning, some of the sources the shuruhat he uses, I will talk about in a second, but the sources are not mentioned in the dirasa. So I'm just looking at this section. So for example, in this section he cites from Sa'id al-Mansur, al-Firdaus was Daylami, not the Muslim, just the Firdaus, the Mu'jam al-Kabir of Tabarani, and also Tabarani, the Mukhtasar Qiyam al-Layl of Mundhari, Tarikh Dimashq, Shu'ab al-Iman, then Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, already there, but Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Musnad Ahmed, Mustadrak, Abu Nu'aym, the Amali of Abu Bakr ibn Hussein, al-Rafi'i in his At-Tadween fi Akhbar al-Kazween. Just in this section of these 13 narrations that he's going. So
he's going out the standard books of hadith basically. He's not trying to stick to that. That's not his idea.
So that is very different. Yeah. So then I thought, okay, what he's doing is supplementing, right? But then in the later section, in Sifatul Salah, what he does is he actually changes it around, right? So he actually changes it around. So what he does is, I've got, in each chapter I've mentioned what the differences are. I can't go through all of them, right? But for example, in Sifatul Salah, he has Khatib, in Mishkāt al-Masābīh, there's a whole host of hadith about Rafi Yadayn.
Okay.
So what he does here is, he takes out all those hadith, right? And then he brings all the hadith that are pro-Rafi, right? So, anti-Rafi.
Anti-Rafi.
Yeah. So he takes out those hadith. So he mentions Ibn Mas'ud hadith, Ibn Khattab, right?
Made him Shafi'i for him.
Yeah. So he takes them. So he actually takes them out now. Yeah. So initially I was reading through, I thought, he's kept them all in and he's added stuff in. But in this case, he's taken those hadith out and put the other hadith in there.
So there's now a greater input from him as
that
to
whole
what he's
chapter,
chosen, etc.
Exactly. So the chapters are the same. He's added a few chapters as well, by the way, from Fadal al-Quran. He's added a few chapters in, but generally it's the same order. But in this case, he's taken it out. So this is what I meant was that if you're going to be studying Zujajah Masābih, so if you're going to study, let's say, Mishkāt al-Masābīh, it suffices Masābih or Sunnah.
Yeah.
So if you study Mishkāt al-Masābīh, it means you can say you study Masābih or Sunnah. It's the same hadith in there. With Zujajah Masābīh, you haven't studied Mishkāt.
Yeah, it's different.
So that's what I meant was that it can't suffice it. So if you put Mishkāt instead of, sorry, Zujajah Masābīh instead of Mishkāt, it's not going to fulfill your purpose.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying, right?
Do you think it could be a mix? So the author, he's done a mix. He's not particularly tried to make additions, and he's not always only focused on just the Hanafi Dala'il, but he's done a mix of both. So he's basically said where Mishkāt missed out the ahadith for our madhab, I want to mention it, and I'm not going to need to mention what Mishkāt's mentioned, but where Mishkāt and has mentioned on topics like Iman, Zuhud, Akhlaq and Adab, they're not madhabi topics, so I can just add whatever I can
and that seems to be the manhaj. Right? From what I've seen, reading through it and numbers, etc., that seems to be the manhaj. So there's more hadith in here than there are in Mishkāt.
Okay.
And there's more
hadith.
You have a total? The total number would be, let's go to the last hadith. It's in the beginning, but let's check the last volume. So the last hadith is, so you see it was Mishkāt was 6,000 something, right?
Yeah.
So this already has, so this has 7,570. 7,570 narrations to the end, and this includes a lot of these aqwa. By the way, because he used a lot of that source like Kitab al-Athar even. So you see him in Kitab al-Hujjah al-Madinah. He uses that. It's interesting in the Muqaddimah, in the Dirasa, small Dirasa, he says that from the books, he actually uses like even recent books like Laknawi's books. He uses Badr al-Majhood, not for the commentaries. That's what I mentioned at the point of this, right? So that many hadiths, more hadith than in the Mishkāt. And then also what he does is he provides commentary. Right, but the commentaries, he's got his hashia where he discusses stuff, and then in the main text, he mentions odd comments from like Al-Aini, Ibn Humam, right, or even like Zujājah of Laknawi. He'll cite from them, and so there would be some, like if it's a fiqhi issue, he will mention like a mukhtasar quotation from Ibn Humam, let's say, or Al-Aini, that explains the Hanafi mas'ala in the case. Okay, so that's what he also adds as well. That's in the main text, and then he has his hawashi as well.
It becomes very useful then.
Yeah, so it's very good for a person who is, so that's why I said that if you're, as a Hanafi student, reading Mishkāt al-Masābīh and you're going through the Hadith al-Ahkam specifically, right? I like the other bab, doesn't matter. If you're going through Hadith al-Ahkam specifically, and you just want to have a collection of what are the hadith that are usually going to be cited in Hanafi text, then rather than having to look through I'la al-Sunan or one of the other books and see what hadith is cited, etc., right? It can be a bit of because it'll be different ordering. You can just have this with you and just see what they've cited. This is, like I said, this is not for any sectarian grounds, right? Like you're fanatic Hanafi. You're Hanafi in the madhab, so it only makes sense you want to know what your madhab says.
Yes.
Some people get worked up about that for some reason, right? Naturally, if you're Hanbali and you're reading a text of a Hanafi, you want to know what the Hanbalis have said.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, just adopt the madhab that you're reading, right? So naturally, if you have these kind of collections, doesn't mean that it has to be correct or you agree with the Hanafi take on a given issue, but having at least exposure to that is better than thinking these are the only narrations that are there. You see, so having something like this is quite useful to read alongside to be aware. He grades some of the hadith by citing earlier scholars as well. We're going to come to the editing for a second.
So do you think, one of the strengths then I would say, I was about to ask you about the strengths, but you kind of mentioned it here that one of the biggest strengths here is that he's not only just brought a collection of hadith, but he's actually brought useful comments alongside his own hashia from previous scholars. So it becomes like a reference, not just a reference point for that hadith, but for the relevant discussions mentioned by earlier ulama. So that's a very big strength for a student because when you're sitting in class and you want to, a teacher references a discussion and you want to know what a previous scholar has said, it's not always easy to find the scholar who said it, and it's not always easy to find it in the book he said it in, because Umdatul Qari is huge. Aini's Sharh on Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar is huge. So to try and find those discussions, it's looking along.
I would be fascinated to actually know, like, because the sources are vast. He looks at Muwatta Imam Muhammad, Riwayat Imam Muhammad, Musnad Darimi. I'll be interested to see, like, how much was going to original sources, what secondary sources he was using. It'll be quite fascinating to see because it's very accurate. If you look at the footnotes as well, the editor, when he does his takhrij, he gets it mostly more or less right. So it's quite interesting. There's some things in there that you can do a bit of nadar on, right? So for example, hadith number 1179, as I was reading through it, he says, وَفِي مُسْنَدِ إِمَامِنَا أَبِي حَنِيفَ عن ابن عيينة اجتمع أبو حنيفة والأوزاعي رحمه الله في دار حناطين بمكة. And it's a story about when Imam Abu Hanifa meets Imam Awza'i, and then they ask each other, why are you doing Rafi' Yadayn? Why are you not doing Rafi' Yadayn?
Yeah.
And so then Imam Awza'i cites a sanad, and then Imam Abu Hanifa cites his sanad. It's a very famous story. And then at the end, this is used for the evidence for fiqh al-rawi, that we say that the fiqh al-rawi, so he goes, for example, when he cites, Awza'i cites hadith from Zuhri, from Sani, from Abdullah ibn Umar, Imam Abu Hanifa cites, I think it's Hammad, from Ibrahim Nakha'i, from Alqama, from Ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anhum. So he goes, I cite from these guys, you're citing these people. And then he goes through the fiqh of each one, saying how they have the same fiqh if they are mu'afqah than them. And then he cites us to, this comes in Sharh Muslim Abi Hanif al-Qari. In the book, Dirasat fi Ulum al-Hadith. I was trying to look for it before the thing, I couldn't find it right now. But there's a discussion of this story saying that it's not authentic.
Okay. The
story doesn't authentically go back. I've heard a lot of scholars mention the story, but
it's very famous.
Very famous. So he actually mentions it as one of a narration.
Okay.
So as part of the number of narrations. So I think this would have been better to be placed as one of in the Hashia. I don't know if he actually originally numbered it himself, but I'm saying it's probably better to not mention as one of the narrations because as far as I recall, it doesn't have a full sanad or there's some issues with it in terms of authenticity mentioned by Shaykh Abdul Majid Turkmani in his book.
So does the author as well, when he presents his babs, talking about ahadith or ahkam, because I think that's where the crux of his work is going to be, right?
Yeah.
So does he present, as you mentioned, the bab title will be your commentary, and then he has his own commentary as well, but does he posit arguments, his own arguments in his own...
In the bab or just...
in his bab, in his hashia, does he present
the
his
bab
own...
stick more or less the same as, what do you call it, of what Mishkāt has, right? Slight variation, I see, but I don't know if that's his nuskha, but it's got a slight variation, but it's more or less the same. In terms of comments that he's mentioned, yes, there are useful comments that he's mentioned throughout. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking, like, did he posit his own arguments?
His own arguments?
Yeah, like he had his own comments about a certain hadith that he saw. You know what? This hadith is also here in this mas'ala.
Yeah, I've not, from what I've read, I'm pretty sure there would have been other volumes. From what I read big chunks of the book. I didn't see anything like that standing out or like his own unique take on something. It seemed to be the unique take, if you like, was the collection of the hadith. And a lot of the statements, discussions are quoting other people, and then he does sometimes reconcile himself.
Okay.
But a lot of it are quotations. But in terms of like he himself, he cites a hadith. So for example, he cites from hadith number 1181 from Ibrahim and Aswad قال رأيت عمر الخطاب يرفع يديه في أول تكبيرة ثم لا يعود. Because رواه الطحاوي وبيهقي وقال الطحاوي هذا حديث صحيح. So he actually cites Tahawi's grading himself. That's actually in the matan itself. But it's not regular. It's not regular. So sometimes you do get the Razin quote in the hadith that I mentioned to you. That's in here as well.
Okay.
That same hadith is in here. And so that's in terms of the kitab itself. We don't want to go too long, just quickly now. We'll wrap up on this, right? As for the editing, right, what does the editor do in terms of takhrij and tahqiq? I find it very useful. What Shaykh Abu Sahal Muhammad Sa'ad Shaykh Abdullah has done is that he doesn't look at, so he doesn't grade the sanad himself, right? And this is like following the manhaj of scholars like Shaykh Abdul Fattah Bughudda, etc., right? Is that they don't grade the sanad. What they do is they try to look for an earlier grading of the hadith. So what they do, instead, there are cases we discuss the isnad. I'm not saying it's completely absent, right? So when you can't find something or there's something to mention, we'll discuss the sanad itself. But usually you want to give like a clear-cut hukam, or more to be there's da'af in it because of this person or there's this issue with it.
But they won't give a clear ruling that this is hadith da'if.
But what he tries to do is, like, for example, if it's in Tirmidhi, we mentioned Tirmidhi's hukam. If it's in al-Hakim, we mentioned Hakim's hukam. He does the muwafaqat al-Dhahabi that we mentioned a problem with before. He cites that. If it's Sukut Abu Dawud, he might mention Sukut Abu Dawud, which he takes, the author as well, takes issue of Sukut Abu Dawud being Salih Ihtijaj. We spoke about that as well, where the other position is Salih I'tibar. He looks at the hadith which are in Mishkāt, which outside of Sahihain, which Ibn Hajar has mentioned in his takhrij of the work. He does go with the notion that whatever, as Ibn Hajar himself said, what I'm saying about is Hasan. So he does say Hassanahu Ibn Hajar. Even though he may not have said Hasan directly, but because of the qa'idah, he follows that there.
does that qaida work? Or is it like Abu Dawood's?
Yeah, that would require a bit of a thorough reading of checking up those thoughts that he's silent upon and then comparing it to the...
Because it might very well be the case that it might just become like Abu Dawood's.
Yeah, but he does say the qaida quite clearly.
Yeah.
There he goes, it's Hasan. It's not like with Abu Dawood's qaida, the debate about what he meant by it.
Yeah, that's true.
Allah knows best, but that will require checking. You can actually maybe do a comparison analysis between his taqreej and what Shaykh Albani said. Allah knows best. And so he does that quite regularly. And what he also does, which is very, very useful, right, which is, it's not given much credit for, is that he discusses the gharib al-fa'al throughout.
Which is now another thing that, does he pull that out of, does he reference TB? He must do.
Yeah, he uses TB, but he uses a lot of lugha, TB, all the commentary, whatever commentary is out there, but he doesn't go into excessive commentary.
Okay.
So what's happened is that the hashia, tahqiq, and the ta'liq of the editor is not extremely long. So you're not going to get bogged down by pages and pages of commentary, of footnotes. Right? So you get enough for you to understand, but he will use Ali al-Qari, for example. He may sometimes go direct to like a Hanafi fiqh text, he might cite that. The author himself, he goes into different masail. So for example, he may be in the hashia, the author, Shaykh Abdullah al-Hayderabadi cites Radd al-Muhtar, he goes into that. And so you see a whole host of things going on in the hashia, but the editor himself, with each hadith, he tries to provide a grading of an earlier scholar.
Okay.
Now, whether that's accurate, like I said, like the Tahsin ibn Hajar or the Muwafaqat al-Dhahabi, etc., whether that's accurate or not, this is my point that I was talking about when we spoke about the hadith of End of Times of Asrar al-Rashid's book, was that I was saying that much is minimum.
Yeah.
So whether you get that right after that, so if you said you read the qaida that Imam Dhahabi's muwafaqa, his sukut is muwafaqa in his Talkhis al-Mustadrak, then you cite that, then I can't attack you so much for it, because that's a scholars have debated that.
Yeah. So
you still got a precedent. So even though I'm going to agree with you, but I'm not going to criticize you directly for that, because you've got a precedent from scholarship. Although I can criticize the idea, but not you. So here, even though you might disagree with some of the gradings that may have taken place, but it's based upon precedence. So he's citing someone that has graded it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Imam Tahawi, for example, any hadith Sharmani Athar, the editor makes a point to mention Badruddin Aini's grading of a Nukhb al-Afkar, because Al-Aini grades every hadith Nukhb al-Afkar. Yeah. So he makes sure to mention that grading. If there's a hadith cited, other sources that mention it, he does the takhrij of that as well. So it's quite a thorough book. So yes, I would highly advise students to get hold of it, to use it alongside Mishkāt al-Masābīh. This edition is very good. The Maktab Bushra print doesn't do the same amount of effort on the isnad.
Okay.
So you're not going to get that same benefit. So here you're going to get benefits. So for example, the hadith that we cite from Razin, if you look in this book, he says Tarikh Dimashq, that's where originally comes in. But then he says that the hadith has a shahid. So he doesn't say it's fabricated, all right? But he says he has a shahid in Musnad Ahmed.
Okay.
And that, I believe he said, is Hasan or Sahih, what he said, right? So he does it like that. So he's not really, I don't know what to make of that. Right?
Yeah.
But but I don't think, because he doesn't find a historical figure that I think has called it a fabrication. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
So maybe that's why he's been
just reluctant to call it.
So he himself, maybe that's why he's reluctant to do that. And that is a way that some scholars have done, which is just reluctance to give jazm on hukam on certain things.
Fair enough.
So some people do that. Maybe it would have been good to mention what the narrator in there, the problem in it. But even then, some people are reluctant to give a jazm, but he did mention the shahid for it.
Okay.
There's a similar report that testifies his meaning.
Which needs to be looked at, I guess.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it, but yeah.
We will end it there. We've gone on for quite a bit. But this was a very enlightening discussion on the book Zujajah al-Masābīh, which is newly published. I think it was published earlier this year. I think, when was it published? I think it was March or something. But it was a very enlightening. 2022 it was published. Late 2022 then there must be. And also a discussion on Mishkāt al-Masābīh, and by extension, bonus, Masābih al-Sunnah.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to give one last book that we should have mentioned, that we didn't mention. We should have mentioned in the beginning. If you can put it in the thing, good that Maulana Mahfuz Silhati, I had this in my notes so to mention. I didn't have it right in my notes, so I forgot. Maulana Mahfuz Silhati, who's a local scholar. He's the one who worked on the Sunan Abi Dawud, the Amali, the dictations of Allama Kashmiri. He's got an English madkhal to Mishkāt.
Okay.
Right? It's been published with Turath. I know about this because I was sent a draft to edit. It was about a year and a half ago. But I read in the Sunan Abi Dawud, these sites, it's saying it's going to be published soon. So for if somehow I'll mention a comment, maybe because someone may not come this late into the thing, or maybe you can put it as shorts, maybe, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
That he's got one, and that should be coming out. And I read it a couple when it was being edited, it was still being edited. So a lot of the detail, the discussions that we're mentioning, the commentaries, etc. It's a relatively small book in English, accessible to the reader, so you can read that book as well.
It's quite older.
But it's not published yet. But it should be published soon.
Okay, Alhamdulillah.
Maulana Mahfouz Silhati, he's a local scholar, actually based in London.
He's based in London.
Scholar, yeah, local scholar. Not people don't know much about him. But he's doing a lot of work in Arabic and some work in English as well.
Up in the game.
Yeah,
inshallah. That's fine. Jazakumullahu khairan to Maulana Zeeshan, to myself, and we hope to see you next time, inshallah.